I got woken up this loud noise, and I came out and I had a sculpture in my house, and Elvie walked into it and broke it. And she felt so bad, but she had degenerative glaucoma. She was legally blind and could not see until she medicated with cannabis. So it was sort of my aha moment. I was like, wait a second, it works for me for my ADD. How can the same plant work for this other person that's not like me for a completely different condition?
Our next guest likes to get high, and he thinks that if you have the right understanding of your DNA, maybe you should try cannabis and or other CBD products. He is the CEO of EndoDNA and wrote the book on personalizing cannabis titled Making Cannabis Personal. Take the guesswork out of your cannabis and CBD experience by tailoring it to your DNA. And Len is here to teach us the importance of the interaction between cannabis and our cannabinoid system.
My dad said, you have 5 minutes to get your stuff and get out. And he literally kicked me out the door. So I was homeless for a while. But the irony of this whole thing, that my parents...
Hi, my name is Chris Burris. I'm a longevity expert and the chief scientist at a lab focused on a longevity molecule. My primary focus is to help people live longer and better lives with science. Make sure to subscribe and share so you and your friends can live longer and better. Well, actually, so you and your friends can live beyond the norms.
Hi, and welcome to the Live Beyond the Norms Health and Longevity Podcast. Our next guest likes to get high, and he thinks that if you have the right understanding of your DNA, maybe you should try cannabis and or other CBD products. Now, before you go judging Len May, you need to know his story. Len graduated from Temple University and he went on to get his master's at the University of Pennsylvania. He is the CEO of EndoDNA and wrote the book on personalizing cannabis titled Making Cannabis Personal. Take the guesswork out of your cannabis and CBD experience by tailoring it to your DNA. He has spoken on illustrious stages like Canatech, a leading conference in the cannabis investment space, and Len is here to teach us the importance of the interaction between cannabis and our cannabinoid system. Len, thank you so much for joining us today.
Appreciate it, Chris. Thank you.
So before we dive into your experience and expertise in DNA and cannabis, I always like my audience to get to know you better, to get to know what it was like to be young Len. Where did you grow up and what was your family like? And if you had to pinpoint something or someone as a great indication that you would become a cannabis DNA entrepreneur, who or what would that be?
Well, I was born in Lithuania. And people are like, oh, where the hell is that? It's a little country. It used to be part of the Soviet Union. And when the Baltic states, the first ones to secede from the Soviet Union. I immigrated with my parents and my mom's parents, my grandparents, when I was 6. And we settled eventually in Philadelphia. So I grew up in Philadelphia. I'm an only child. And the type of kid that I was is teacher would call me in class, and my mind would be elsewhere. I would be daydreaming all the time, and I became disruptive after a while because I was diagnosed with ADD. So my mind was always kind of elsewhere, and I was put on prescription meds. I can't say they didn't work. They may have allowed me to focus, but they removed my sense of self. So I had no feeling. It was just kind of numb to the world, but I could focus, which wasn't really helpful. But, maybe the teachers thought I was less disruptive or something like that. So I was going to class, and there was some older kids hanging out, and they're just like, hey, man, you want to smoke a cigarette with us? I was like, cool. I get to hang out with the cool kids, smoke a cigarette. And I never questioned why they only have one cigarette, but that's a whole other thing. So they passed around the cigarette, and I got dragged, and I was dabbling in cigarettes because it was a cool thing to do in the 80s. And took a drag and didn't taste like a cigarette. So I took another one, maybe coughed, I don't even remember. And they were laughing at me. I was like, what? And they put cannabis in the cigarette. So when I went back to class, like sort of the windows in my head narrowed and I could focus. So I dropped all the prescription meds and I started consuming cannabis as my medicine without telling anybody that it was actually medicine for me. I was just taking it, everywhere we could get, like, little bags with seeds and stems and all that stuff that we did in the 80s. But that became sort of my go-to medicine.
So did your parents kind of know what was going on in this case? Like, so they were probably buying your prescription, and I'm assuming it was like ADD, ADHD. Were they buying the prescription, and were you making those disappear to keep it off the radar? What did that
Oh,
look like?
yeah, there was a lot of bottles in my room that I'd never taken. So my parents would do that, and then eventually they caught me a couple times, and I would get punished and all that stuff for cannabis. And then eventually, when I was in my late teens, I came downstairs. After I had fake ID, so I would go out clubbing and and I would sleep half the day, and I'd come back downstairs, and my parents had this pouch that I used to keep in my car with like a little bit of cannabis, like a pipe, whatever, rolling papers, and it was on their kitchen table. And my parents were like, "That's it. What are we gonna do with you?" I'm like, "I don't know. This is my medicine. I'm nothing you can do." Like, well, you know what? We're gonna call the cops. Let them decide. So they actually called the cops on me, and it was two female officers that came in, and they were like, "Oh, we're gonna lock you up." I'm like, "Okay, well, go ahead. I don't really have anything much on me." Like, you know what? If it was my son, I would just kick him to the curb. And they threw out my cannabis, and my dad said, "You have 5 minutes to get your stuff and get out." And he literally kicked me out the door. So I was homeless for a while. But the irony of this whole thing, that my parents consume products and my company has patents on, and products that we created now, and they're big supporters of what we do. So it kind of came full circle.
Yeah, that must have been really rough, right? Did it feel at any point, right? Because you think about, I think about the kids who would smoke marijuana in my school, and they seemed, most importantly, like escaping. Like some of it probably was escaping. I mean, one, from like the pressures of your parents. You have immigrants' parents. They probably put a lot of pressure on you in general. That seems to be the case. And then, just general pressures. And then also you have this pressure of being able to focus. Like, how would you say like those kind of interplayed with each other?
I grew up in a household with a lot of violence as well. So I, my parents, my dad was a disciplinarian. There was a lot of, what you would probably say is abuse, and I had to go through a lot of therapy. And at one point, I was able to forgive, and I have a great relation with my dad, and we speak every day now. But it was escape is one thing. There was definitely part of escaping. And I could have turned to other substances, but luckily, I did, and I've tried all kinds of different things. It's just cannabis has really resonated with me more than just the escape part, because I've done all kinds of different things. But it actually, I had an experience. So when I was kicked out, and I was living in motels, and I was couch surfing at different people's houses, I had to get a job, and I was a big music fan, and I would go to Tower Records. For all you kids that you don't know, it used to be an amazing record store where you could buy records and CDs and cassettes and all that stuff. So I would go all the time, and when I had money, I would buy some stuff. And they had a job opening for a cashier. So I got a job at Tower Records, and I became a music buyer after some time. But in perks of working as a music buyer at Tower Records, you get paid like $7 an hour, but you get tickets to different things. So I got these tickets for what was called the Horde Festival. And the Horde Festival was the Blues Travelers, Ziggy Marley, Black Crowes, and I got to go. And there was a booth, and they had this banner called the Cannabis Action Network. And I came up to these guys, and I'm like, "Hey, what are you guys doing?" Like, fighting for legalization of cannabis. I'm like, "What are you guys doing?" I said, "Oh, well, registering people to vote." I said, "Cool. What else are you doing?" And they were like, "That's it, registering people to vote." So I became the president of the Cannabis Action Network after a while. And I held a rally at Independence Hall in Philadelphia. And where the Constitution, Declaration of Independence is, and all that stuff. And I had a keynote speaker. My keynote speaker was this woman named Elvie Masika. And she was one of the first people to get federally prescribed cannabis under a NIDA program, which actually cannabis was cultivated in University of Mississippi, and it was rolled into these cigarette joints with a metal jar with a USDA label. And you would think, well, wait a second, what do you mean? It's a Schedule I narcotic. It doesn't have any medical benefits, right? yeah, but the federal government did decide that 16 people did qualify for cannabis as medicine and actually had a patent on the neuroprotective qualities of cannabis, several patents. So the irony of that is that, she presented and consumed her federally prescribed cannabis in front of federal rangers. And next morning, everybody crashed in my house and we got woken up with this loud noise. And I came out and I had a sculpture in my house and Elvie walked into it and broke it. And she felt so bad, but she had degenerative glaucoma. She was legally blind and could not see until she medicated with cannabis. So it was sort of my aha moment. I was like, wait a second. It works for me for my ADD. How can the same plant work for this other person that's not like me for a completely different condition? So that's when I started doing a deep dive into the science and understanding the endocannabinoid system. And that was part of my beginning of my journey.
Yeah, very interesting to already be right in leading the Cannabis Action Network and then have this kind of early event that just reinvigorates you or really kind of gives you this concrete understanding that this is something worth pursuing. So as I kind of look through some back stuff, you were kind of clearly entrenched in going down. You did consulting with Price Waterhouse, Cognizant. You did a bit of real estate, the movie industry. In 2015, you landed in the medical cannabis and genomics industry. Honestly, I think we could talk at length about each of these phases. I love all business and all kind of different directions. And actually, you've already talked about this. How did you end up in the cannabis industry? So you kind of described that by leading the Cannabis Action Network, but that isn't the first foray into owning a business. How'd you land there, and then ultimately in kind of folded genomic sequencing?
Yeah, so this was I think the rally was in 1993. So it's we thought we were gonna get legalization right away, and Pennsylvania legalized 30 years later. So it was a long journey. So my ex-wife, who was my girlfriend at the time, she's like, you know what, you have to get a real job if we're gonna have a serious relationship and all this other stuff. So I'm like, I'll put together a resume, and fortunately or unfortunately, whatever, everything is fortunate, I guess. I got a job offer at Price Waterhouse before it was PwC, and went to work for them. Then with the merger, I got recruited by a venture capital company called Safeguard Scientific, worked for them, and then they had some challenges with their stock. Went to work with Cognizant, as you mentioned, so I did on-site offshore development, and I made really good money, but I was still missing something. Like I always look for, what is my purpose? What can I do to feed myself so I have enough to give to others? And it wasn't really fulfilling. And so I invested in a real estate property in Florida and sold that. And I was like, man, maybe I should do real estate. It felt really good. So I resigned and got a job in real estate. I eventually became a managing director for Keller Williams Commercial, which is a very large real estate company, and was doing real estate deals. And my ex-wife, who's an actress, or was an actress at the time, we were going back and forth from Philly to LA. So eventually we moved, and I was sitting in a real estate office. It's not a reciprocal estate. I was a broker, but it's not reciprocal. I still have to take my license. I was trying to figure out what I wanted to do. But it was 2010, so the real estate market was not great at that time. And I was sitting there, and these guys came in and were talking to another agent about opening an alternative pharmacy. It was like, alternative pharmacy? Like, what does that mean? And guys, like, talk to them, because so I started talking to them, like, what are you guys trying to do? Like, I'm like, really, what are you trying to do? Like, dispensary. I'm like, all right, cool. Where's your paperwork? You have to be Prop 215 SB 420 compliant, not for profit, all these different things that I was studying in LA, in California, and they didn't know what I was talking about. So I'm like, I'll help you. And when I helped them, they offered me a partnership. So I came in with them, and we opened up our first dispensary in Santa Ana in Orange County called Kush Kingdom, and we continued to open up 4 more. So we were the exclusive home of Corrupt's Kush and Method Man's Black Eyed OG. But the thing that I started seeing was 2 people will consume the same chemical variety and have a completely different experience. And what really, really was my aha moment in that was one of the guys that worked with us wanted to consume some cannabis. I said, yeah, we have some sativa dominant stuff here. And he goes, no, that stuff puts me to sleep. I was like, no, not indica. He's like, indica in the couch, you know? He goes, no. For me, that puts me to sleep. So I was like, wait a second, there's something here that I don't understand. So my ADD kicked in, my hyper focus ADD, and I started, and I found a video by a guy named Kevin McKernan, who was the chief science officer of a company called Medicinal Genomics. And he claimed to be the first, or one of the first people to genetically sequence cannabis, the plant. So I reached out to Kevin, long story, a little bit longer. I ended up working with them as a consultant. So my job was to travel the U.S., get plant material from different growers, bring it back to my lab, extract the DNA, and send it to a sequencer and sequence that DNA. And we started the first genetic library of chemical varieties called Cannapedia, of chemovars and cultivars with a K, and we put it on the blockchain. So you can have a chain of custody if you're a cultivator on, and the understanding of these names that we give these chemical varieties really don't mean anything. So I'll give you an example. If I had 5 varietals of Blue Dream, like the grower said it's Blue Dream, which is a chemical variety of cannabis, and when I sequenced them, like 2 of them were pretty much Blue Dream. They had a couple other things, but you can kind of see, all right, you know, they identify as Blue Dream genetically. 2 other ones were not. They had some Blue Dream in them, but they were not Blue Dream genetically. And the 5th one was not even close. They were just slapping a label on there like we did with OG and everything. So that led me to understanding, all right, that's the plant side. And the parent company of Medicinal Genomics was called Cortigen Life Sciences. They did pharmacogenomics, so the study of how drugs affect individual bodies and metabolism and everything else. So I got really into the human side and started learning the pharmacogenomic side, the human genetics. And I had an idea one day. I said, we have plant genetics here, we have human genetics here. Let's bring those 2 together to guide people to a personalized experience. They really didn't want to do that. They closed down the human side and started focusing on the plants. So I was lucky enough to grab some smart scientists with me and launched EndoDNA in 2017, December of 2017.
27. Wow, that's a really cool story. One of the things that kind of popped into my mind is you talked about strains. I think you call them cultivars. Explain that. And then what are the classic strains that are kind of out there that maybe you were testing and kind of realizing, hey, they aren't what they say they are. And what are you supposed to experience on some of those strains or cultivars?
Yeah, well, so the great Dr. Ethan Russo told me that a strain refers to a virus. And why are we calling this amazing, beautiful plant a virus? There's a chemical variety. There's a cultivar, which is what grows from the ground, and that's the varietal of that grows from the ground. And then when you extract it, there's a chemical variety, so it has its cannabinoid profile, and then it has its terpene profile and flavonoids, etc. So the components of the plant we identify somewhere. The plant has over 400 different components. The genetics of the plant are called phytocannabinoids. When the plant grows, it has the major mother cannabinoid called CBG, cannabidiol, and from there, it starts expressing other cannabinoids. And the one cannabinoid that has the euphoric sense that we get is delta-9 tetrahydrocannabinol, THC, that we know. And there's, CBD as well, which is cannabidiol. And there's a whole bunch of other varietals, chemicals in the varietals, including terpenes, which are the essential oils of the plant, and then flavonoids. So the essential oils of the plant, those terpenes, give it its smell. And so if you look at to answer your question about what different strains and varietals and chemical varieties there are, you have these landrace genetics. And the landrace genetics, they came from a certain part of the world. They grew in that part of the world. So the original landrace, what we would say is indica landraces, came from Southeast Asia, around the Kashmir region. And if you look at them and you go back in history in either China or India, in those areas, they had harsher climates, and the plant itself sort of grew lower to the ground, thicker. And when you cut it down, it had a diesely skunky kind of smell to that. And that plant was dominant in what's called myrcene, which is a terpene profile that is associated with a sedative. that's what makes you sedated in a way. And the theory was that the plant expressed its own terpene profiles to address the predators that were natural to that region, that smell that they were secreting, and it actually had an effect. So the sativa dominant or the sativa landrace strains or chemical varieties originated in different climates, more humid, more warmer climates like the Mauis in Hawaii or the Durbans in South Africa. They grew longer towards the sun, thinner, and it expressed a different terpene profile. So some of them had more of a fruitier type of smell to them. And that had to do with the terpene called limonene, which is also found in citrus fruit and gives you a boost of dopamine. So those are associated with the sativa landrace chemical varieties, giving you that boost up, GABA, and that gives you more sedative. So what you look at in the plant is you look at the cannabinoid profile, which is the one that you probably need to be most aware of is THC, because that's the one that's going to get you that feeling of being high. And then you look for the other cannabinoids and terpenes, but that secret sauce that is associated with what works best for you, that's sort of your secret sauce. You go out and you find the chemical varieties or the tinctures or whatever it is that better align with you. And then method of consumption is really important because some people metabolize slower than others. Some people are poor metabolizers. Some people are rapid metabolizers. So I know a lot of people that I talk to about CBD, like, CBD doesn't really work for me. Well, how much do you take? I take like a dropper full, almost a dropper full. Well, if you're an ultra rapid metabolizer and you're taking that, perhaps you're creating really expensive urine for yourself and you're peeing it out and not really getting the effect. So maybe dosing is something you have to look at. So that's based on metabolic function as well that our company looks at.
So you kind of mentioned indica and myrcene, which has the effect of, what was the effect of myrcene again?
It's sedative. It's sedative.
Sedative, yeah. So to just totally chill you out, limonene, if I'm saying that right, limonene, which is a dopamine, which would be a feel good, and really indica and sativa are those are the two that people would talk about in terms of cultivars, right? Like in general. And then you're starting to put together this DNA library to dig into, like, okay, anybody who's saying they have indica, do they really have indica? Where did Blue Dream fall in that? Was that like one particular brand, and they had taken one particular cultivar and said this is our thing?
No, it's hybrid. So, people talk about people in cannabis as being stoners and lazy. Some of the most brilliant people in the world are people that are in scientific parts of the cannabis industry. And you have botanists that crossbreed. So you have one, strain, as you said, one chemical variety with another chemical variety. They crossbreed those varietals for different things. So the number one thing that they were crossbreeding originally for was yield. So they wanted to have the most yield for the least amount, so they can get more yield from their harvest.
Yep.
Then they started looking at, well, what can we do about an effect? Can we actually breed higher THC chemical varieties? Can we actually breed into a terpene profile? So once you started establishing that, all the indica sativa started going away, and you had hybrids of each one. So if you look at the terpene profile and the cannabinoid profile, you can kind of see which way it's leaning. So if it has, limonene, pinene, those are sativa dominant hybrids. If you have myrcene, terpenoline, etc., maybe even linalool, those are usually lean more indica and more sedative. And then there's some things that are in the middle. So one part of it is what the plant is. The other part of it is your own endocannabinoid system. So if you have deficiencies in certain endogenous endocannabinoids, what we produce ourselves, we can get some of that from the plant. But THC itself has a very narrow therapeutic window. So if you take just the right amount, you can subsidize because you're binding to your CB1 receptors, which are located in your brain and central nervous system, and you excrete more anandamide, which is your the word ananda means bliss in Sanskrit, so that's your bliss chemical that you release. And then 2-AG is released with CBD, and it binds to your as an affinity for your CB2 receptors, and are located mostly in your digestive and your immune system, etc. So, but if you're prone to things like stress reactivity, etc., if you take a little bit too much THC, it does the opposite. It triggers those adverse events. So somebody can feel it's a vasodilator, so your heart will pump faster. You can have some anxiety events resulting in that. So finding the right ratio of cannabinoids and terpenes for the individual, that's really that's really the key to be able to get efficacy.
So I want to dig in that, but before we go there, I want to kind of stay really where you started, which was like DNA analysis. One question that I have is, right, so you have the DNA marker. We're so aware, in the biohacking space, longevity space, medical space, that you've got your DNA, but that isn't a prescription of what exactly is going to happen to you. You have your epigenetic expression. How much of a role does how it grows? Like, I know, and I didn't know this, but it was kind of fascinating when I learned it. I was doing some tour somewhere, and they're saying that you don't grow grapes actually down in the valley because that's where all the nutrients are. You actually grow grapes up at the top of the mountains where all the nutrients have been depleted by the water. Ostensibly, the struggle to survive in that environment creates a better grape. Like, you always have this picture of growers just trying to maximize growth, but is there any benefit in stressing the plant as it's growing to understand, to have it, deliver a different product altogether?
That's how they get that product altogether. The stress of the plant excretes your optimal terpene profile and also your cure. So once you cut the plant down, how you cure it, which is the drying process, if you try to mimic what's natural to that specific chemical variety, what the humidity levels are, how long you hold it for, all those things, they can fully express their true potential, what they're supposed to be. So to answer your question back about epigenetic, you're absolutely right, Chris. Your genetic predisposition is sort of like your GPS of life. I can drive from LA to Philly without a GPS. Am I going to get there? Yeah. Am I going to make some wrong turns? Absolutely. I'm going to hit some potholes, traffic, all those different things. The GPS allows me to know where the potholes are in my road. It allows me to see, where the traffic jam is so I can avoid those sharp corners. And that's what a genome test shows you. What you need to do is you also need to adjust your lifestyle. And we do have an epigenetic component to that. So lifestyle choices will help to turn those switches on or off. And what people, I think, also know in the biohacking space, everybody knows pretty much that, you have your genetics, you got them from 50% from your father, 50% from your mother, and some of them are in the on position. So, things like your predisposition, your hair color, your eye color, your skin color, all these different things. But the rest of them, you can turn on or off based on lifestyle choices. So lifestyle choices include diet. What's the food that we consume? What are the supplements that we're getting? What's the exposure to heavy metals, to pesticides, all these different things? They affect epigenetic expression. Also, our neurochemistry affects epigenetic expression. If you were secreting too much cortisol, it can affect your epigenetic expression. So understanding what your genetic predisposition is, having a protocol or a treatment plan or something of that nature that allows you to know what it is that you should be consuming, having a feedback loop of how that works, and having an epigenetic test at the end of that, seeing if, like your biological age, for instance, if your biological age has been reduced based on a protocol that you're consuming, now you can see which methyl markers have been added or subtracted to see that epigenetically turn on or off. So that's encompasses a full, that's the full testing. It's the DNA test, the epigenetic test on baseline, the interactive treatment plan. What is that you should take? How much should you take? What should you get? And then a feedback loop driven by AI that completes the cycle.
Okay, that's very, and I want to dive more into that also here in a section, actually even the endocannabinoid system. One last question, as you on kind of the DNA side on the actual plant. How many components are you looking at typically? Like there's, like so many things that you could be looking at. A lot of DNA results will look at 50 or 100 to start identifying, is it Blue Dream or is it not? Like, what does that kind of profile look like?
Yeah, so we EndoDNA doesn't do the plant genomics
Anymore. Okay, so that's back when you were doing that.
Yeah, so we do that with medicinal genomics or other companies do that. What we rely on is test results. So because, different states have different regulations, every state now that has a program for legal cannabis, which is, 37 states have some sort of program, you have what's called a certificate of analysis. So a test result for the product. We ingest that test result that shows you the cannabinoids, sometimes the terpenes, etc. We run that through an algorithm, and we show you how closely that product matches the suggested ratio in your endocannabinoid system test. So that's how we sort of match the two together.
Those two. Awesome. So let's talk, so what is the endocannabinoid system in general? Like, what is it?
Yeah, it's a great question. So the endocannabinoid system was discovered in 1992 by an Israeli scientist named Dr. Raphael Mechoulam. He just passed away a couple years ago. And the endocannabinoid system is our primary modulating system. So its overall goal is to maintain balance, or what's called homeostasis in our bodies. And it does it in a very unique way. So it gets signals from the other systems, like our immune system, our endocrine system, etc. It sends that signal up the central nervous system, like salmon swimming upstream, to your brain. And your brain makes a decision which endogenous, that means we create those ourselves, which endogenous endocannabinoids to release to get our system back in balance. So the two that it uses are, as I mentioned before, anandamide. So anandamide, the word ananda means bliss in Sanskrit. This is our first endogenous endocannabinoid. And then the second one is called 2-AG. So I'll give you an example. Maybe this is something that's more relatable. So, Chris, let's say that you're walking down the street and a car pulls out of nowhere and almost hits you. So you're going to have a natural fight or flight response. So you're going to secrete a bunch of neurochemicals. You're going to secrete some dopamine, some adrenaline, some norepinephrine, some cortisol. Now, when your brain realizes no lion chasing the jungle, it does a couple things. There's a reuptake of those neurochemicals, and then your brain releases new neurochemicals to get you back to that homeostasis, that balance. And those are anandamide and 2-AG, among others, but those are predominantly what it releases. So where genetics come into play, as part of the endocannabinoid system, let's say an example, there's a gene called FAH, fatty acid amide hydrolase, FAAH. That's single nucleotide polymorphism in that gene produces an enzyme that actually metabolizes or breaks down anandamide. So remember, anandamide is that bliss molecule that's secreted. So if you're breaking down more anandamide than the average person, you're not secreting enough of that. What happens is, or may happen is, that cortisol can stay longer in your bloodstream. And if it stays long in your bloodstream, there's a couple of things that can happen. It can lower your pH level, make you more acidic. Number two, it can actually create an overactive immune response, so a cytokine in that area. And if you have predispositions to gut health issues like IBD, etc., it can trigger those as well. So if somebody's having these pains, ankles, knees, hips, all your joints, it can be caused based on extra cortisol that's in your bloodstream. So the good news is that you can take phytocannabinoids to subsidize what you naturally are deficient in because you're breaking down more rapidly. So THC will bind to your CB1 receptors, brain central nervous system, squirt a bunch of anandamide. So if you need a certain amount, it'll do that, and it'll subsidize for what you're missing. And when you consume CBD, it actually binds to or has an affinity for the CB2 receptors and releases more 2-AG. Now, to preface, when the plant grows in its native state, that THC delta 9 tetrahydrocannabinol has an acid molecule. Same thing with CBD. that acid molecule, when you heat it, it's called decarboxylation. It drops the acid molecule, and now you have a perfect binding affinity for that receptor. So there's 3 prongs. It binds to the CB1 receptor, squirts an anandamide. And that's when we get that, that's how the endocannabinoid system works. Now, the issue is, if you have, as I mentioned before, predisposition to stress reactivity, PTSD, slow rate of fear extinction, if you take a little bit too much THC, it's not going to just subsidize what you're missing, is going to create maybe a free radical of an anandamide. Your immune system may over-respond to that and trigger those stress reactivity, etc. So now, instead of having a therapeutic response, now you're having an adverse event. So finding the right amount, what to take, what method of consumption is. Things like drug-to-drug interaction. There's certain medications that somebody may be on that interacts with your phytocannabinoids. Some may be inducers, some may be inhibitors. So you have to look at all those factors to get to the right amount of what exactly you need.
Hey, super quick break from the podcast. Hopefully you're loving it. This is a way you can support the podcast and take advantage of a great offer. We're offering 50% off of one of our MCT bottles. MCT is an amazing oil. Add the ESS60 molecule to it. It's even more amazing. All you got to do is leave a review on iTunes. Send us a notification that you've left that review. We'll get you a coupon code. That'll get you 50% off of our MCT oil and free shipping. Back to the podcast.
So you mentioned phytocannabinoids. You have the endocannabinoids. Those are the ones that your body is making kind of endogenously. Is there any difference to how the body reacts to these? And I also want you to talk a little bit about metabolism, because there's multiple ways that you could be consuming this. What might be slower, and what might that look like?
Yeah, great question. So your endogenous endocannabinoids are anandamide and 2-AG. I think we need to talk about drugs in general, because people get this confused all the time. And I'll use cocaine as an example. Not advocating cocaine. Schedule 2, cannabis Schedule 1. So it has a medicinal purpose. You get it prescribed. But we're talking about a recreational user of cocaine. Let's say somebody's a recreational user of cocaine. They consume cocaine. It'll bind to your dopamine receptors and squirt a bunch of dopamine into your bloodstream. And it'll block the reuptake of that dopamine. So at some point, maybe 100 times more than you naturally produce, at some point when it actually gets taken back up, you get that crash and your brain's like, well, wait a second. I like to conserve energy. So you're telling me that I have an exogenous, means that outside of something I produce, a substance that I can take as a ligand, it can actually give me that dopamine without me working too hard at it. So I'm going to send a signal that I want more exogenous cocaine to be able to create more dopamine. So this is the way the drugs work. It's not about the drug itself. It's about our own neurochemistry. There's nothing more addictive that we produce than dopamine. We want more dopamine. So you have a substance that's going to create more dopamine, and you're secreting more dopamine. Same thing with phytocannabinoids. So when you're consuming that phytocannabinoid, it's actually binding to that receptor and squirting our own endogenous endocannabinoid, anandamide and 2-AG. So that's the way it works. Now, there's other cannabinoids and terpenes that we're not exactly sure, because there's no binding affinity to a receptor, but it seems like that together they work better than just one of the molecules alone. So there's what's called this entourage effect that shows that it's much more efficacious when you have all the components together instead of just one isolated molecule. And that's where, the pharmaceutical industry gets a little bit confused about that, because they're very used to, single molecule delivery systems. And your second question about metabolism is, there's a series of genes called cytochrome P450. So CYP450. Each one of these genes produces an enzyme that helps us metabolize something. So there's one for gluten. There's one for lactose, which gives us those sensitivities. And there are specific ones for cannabinoids. The CYP2C9 is one for THC. CYP2C19 is CBD. And CYP3A4 is for CBD and THC together. So this is why this is really important. If you're taking a gummy and it's an isolated THC molecule, and you're a poor metabolizer, and you have predisposition to stress reactivity and PTSD and all these things. When we had these experiences, Grandma Mary takes a few gummies. She's a poor metabolizer. She's like waiting for 45 minutes. Nothing is happening. And all of a sudden, she's so high. She's high for 2 days because slower onset, much more powerful onset because it goes through your liver. Your liver converts that THC to a metabolite of THC, which is called 11-oxyhydroxide. And then it triggers all those stress markers. So now she has a really, adverse experience, and then continues to tell all the people around her, stay away from devil's lettuce kind of thing. So finding the right ratio is really important. So if I'm an ultra metabolizer, ultra rapid metabolizer of CBD, normal of everything else. So if I'm taking isolated CBD and I'm taking a dropper full, doesn't do anything for me either. So understanding method of consumption, sublingual delivery versus first pass delivery, understanding your metabolic function, how you metabolize, and being able to find those products. That's really the secret sauce. That's really how you find what works best for you.
Is there another consumption method that Grandma Mary could have used that would have worked for her?
Yeah, so Grandma Mary actually did. She took a DNA test, said, oh, shit, now I understand I'm a poor metabolizer, all these different things. First of all, the ratio of THC to CBD was equalized. She did better with a 1-to-1 ratio. Also, different terpene profile. Instead of having these things that give her that stress reactivity, linalool that's found in lavender is more calming. Things like beta-caryophyllene that's found in black pepper and clove. It's an anti-inflammatory. She was actually taking it. That's not her real name. I'm just using her as an example. But it's a real person. It's a real person that was diagnosed with cancer and was getting chemo, and her doctor suggested cannabis to help her with the side effects of chemo. And after we found the right ratio for her, and she took it sublingually as a tincture. So under her tongue, sublingual cavity bypasses first pass altogether. You put a tincture under your tongue or your buccal cavity that runs where your jawline is, and you hold it there, and it'll absorb into your sublingual cavity, bypass your liver, and pass a blood-brain barrier and bind to those receptors right away. So once she had that formulation, she had the ratio, she was giving us our business card out to the rest of the people that were doing the chemo treatment in wherever facility she was in. So that makes a huge difference when you find what works for you. Now you're able to share with other people instead of having that adverse event.
Yeah, so she had this kind of bad event. You were able to fix that experience and then also allow the medicine to do its work. You are throwing out a lot of CB1, CB2, P450. That turns into this metabolite. I didn't see chemistry in any of your research. What does that kind of evolution for you look like? And there has to be kind of some moment when you were having a conversation probably with a doctor or a scientist like, wow, I really do know my shit. Talk about that a little.
It's funny. So I went to physical therapy school, and I never worked as a physical therapist in my life, but I know anatomy and physiology. And you're absolutely right. I would get invited to these panels, and I would be the only person that doesn't have these fancy initials before or after my name. And there was actually one. It was a medical related cannabis conference, and there was 4 doctors. I think there was, or maybe it was 3 doctors and me, or 4 doctors. I don't remember. And this one guy kept challenging me, and huge ego. And I really did feel, I felt that I wasn't educated enough, maybe because I didn't have those initials, and I was just starting out on my speaking circuit. And this guy was giving me a hard time, and then somebody asked a question, and they deferred to me, and I started talking about what I know, and the guy was like, you know what? I got to tell you, man, your shit. I learned a lot of stuff. So at that moment, I was just like, I had this knack, I think, of really talking to smart people, really smarter than me, taking that information, and maybe I use some of these terms as well, and being able to regurgitate it in a way that, the average Bob from Iowa can understand. And that's, when I'm passionate about something, it's just this weird memory that I have. My girlfriend tells me all the time, you remember these things. I'm like, I wish somebody can put a projector in my eye and project. I see things in little vignettes, and I can remember like things that happened, 40 years ago, and I know what somebody was wearing. I could see it in my head. So it's a weird memory thing that I have, but I think it's all the things I'm passionate about that I absorb. I talk to people. I read as much as possible, and everything that we do. And we're in the middle of 10 clinical trials. So I talk to people who are scientists who are doing real clinical work and try to get that information from them. And one of the things our platform does, and you were asking about other different cannabinoids as well, we have to have it's developed in a way you have to have a peer-reviewed reference to have a citation for us to be able to display any information. So if there's not enough research, there's nothing there on things like CBN, which is a derivative of delta 9 THC. There's nothing that I can point to in peer-reviewed research. So we only focus on things that we can point to that has peer-reviewed research, unless we're doing the research ourselves as well.
So you have 10 trials running right now. Is that what I understood?
Yeah, there's a phase 2 clinical trial at Harvard. We have 5 clinical trials, research studies at Wayne State in Michigan. We have 3 more in CHUM in Montreal, and we're already published 2 on PubMed.
Wow, that's awesome, man. Well done. A lot of people get into a space and then just rely on their ability to sell and not do research, and we actually continue to do research here, so I have a big appreciation for those people who do that. Now, given that this is in trials, you said phase 2, so it's already past phase 1. Hopefully it gets all the way through. This question actually kind of changes. Maybe today it's still true, but why does THC, or more specifically marijuana, have such a bad rap, right? It definitely does, and that's certainly changing, but maybe this is the last time I can even ask this question.
I don't know. I think, there's many different reasons why. First of all, it's racist, it's political, there's a lot of different things. So if you go back in history, our forefathers brought cannabis with them. Everything that we had, our sails and all the stuff in America, were made of hemp. We grew hemp. We grew cannabis. The Mexican farm workers started bringing marijuana. It wasn't called marijuana. They started bringing it. And I think in the 20s, late 20s, during that flapper jazz era, what was happening was the jazz musicians were consuming the marijuana, the cannabis from the Mexican farm workers. And white dads started being concerned about their daughters intermingling, and there was a couple people, including William Randall Hearst and Harry Anslinger and DuPont. They're the big people that kind of started this whole marijuana reefer madness kind of thing. And the first thing they did was they passed in 1937 marijuana stamp tax act. So they started taxing anybody that would cultivate hemp or anywhere like 400%, and then incentivizing farmers to convert their crops to other things like corn or other things. And then Harry Anslinger was the first. We didn't have a drug enforcement agency, but he was the first representation of a drug enforcement agency to go out and enforce and start, putting people in jail for cultivating. And that was sort of the culmination of when cannabis started going underground. But you still had healers and elixirs that were using cannabis and even opioids in different things. But it's not until the Nixon administration that we had this rescheduling, and that was purely based on control of what he thought was the hippie culture that's consuming all this cannabis, that's going to be a threat to his presidency and all those things. So he did not read his own recommendations from the committee that he formed to see if cannabis had any medical aspect to it, and created this drug enforcement agency that scheduled marijuana, Schedule 1 that has no medicinal purposes, which we talked about earlier. And I think the third hammer on top of that was that Reagan administration with Nancy Reagan and Your Brain on Drugs and Dare. Like, we were drilled in our heads how bad it is. My parents were immigrants. My dad thought that, marijuana was the same as heroin. He had no idea that it was any different. Until he was educated. So I believe it's lack of education. There's a lot of lobbying by the pharmaceutical industry that actually said, we need to create synthetics. Pharmaceutical industry is based on looking at plant medicine and then synthesizing that, creating synthetics. So they tried to create a form of THC called marinol, and during the AIDS epidemic, and it wasn't effective. It just made people sedative, and but it didn't give them the appetite, the munchies. It's a really interesting thing with how cannabis does that, because it sends a signal through your brain to create more what's called ghrelin, which is a chemical that makes us feel hungry. But it's actually we're trying to get satiated, because nobody consumes cannabis and craves kale. We crave what? Sugar, salt, and fat. So those are the things that we feel satiated. It makes us feel comfortable. And those are the things that, synthetics haven't been able to mimic.
So one note is, here's a question. If we didn't even know the endocannabinoid system existed until like 1992, right? Do you think if we knew that system existed, that it would have that marijuana THC would have gone through this path, or is there enough reason? Like, it's just so clear now, like this is medicinal. Like we should have this available, maybe even over the counter, or would it be still a controlled substance but prescribable?
It's hard to answer to go back in time, but I do believe that if doctors were taught, like the endocrine system, like any other system, this is the endocannabinoid system, I think it would change things a lot sooner. Most doctors don't even know there's an endocannabinoid system now. Even though it's discovered, it's not in the curriculum. I mean, I've lectured at universities before, medical students, that it was the first time they heard there was an endocannabinoid system. So it's changing, but it's still slow, and it has a lot to do with the laws. Once the laws change, I think it'll change the perception of cannabis. They're looking to reschedule to Schedule 3 or 4. How to dispense cannabis? I really think there's two paths. There is a medical path, and there's a nutrigenomic path, or a supplement path. When you have all the components right now, you can go in and get a supplement anywhere, as long as it's below a certain threshold of THC. I think it should be purchased over the counter, and there should be prescription based. There's higher amounts that are specific to a condition that you can get prescribed. And then there's also an opportunity, like when you go to a pharmacy and they have some medication that's over the counter, but it's at the pharmacist. You have to show them your license that you're, 21 or whatever it is, and then you can get your medicine. So medicine is interesting, because that means it went through 3 phases of clinical trials. It has a specific use. Like, we have one single medicine in cannabis called Epidiolex for Dravet syndrome, early onset epilepsy, that was created by GW Pharmaceuticals and was acquired by Jazz Pharmaceuticals. But you also have products that you can buy that support, like this will help with this may help with headaches. May help with inflammation. So you can have the same kind of claims with cannabis that it supports, instead of it is used as a medicine. So those are all possibilities, but I definitely think the model of distribution should be focused on, I never understood recreational anyway. I understand adult use. Like, if I'm of age, I should be able to go and purchase anything I want. The putting in the category of alcohol and tobacco, it made no sense. You can't regulate it that way. It doesn't make any sense. And, we already had prohibition in this country. We abolished prohibition, and then states with federal oversight were saying quality control, federal oversight, we need that. But also, what is how does it, the state to state, interstate commerce is created by the different states, and that should be put into place, I think, as well.
Very interesting. Are there some people for whom, like, this isn't good for them, right? Like, it just doesn't work for them? Or is it a matter of, kind of your DNA test saying, hey, it can work for you, you just need to be mindful of these things?
I don't think we know enough. I know that some people have adverse effects that they should be really aware of. I really believe that if we create something ourselves and we're able to get the plant to help us create more of that, if we find the right amount, there's benefits for everyone. For some people, certain things don't work well for them, like any other thing, but side effects are present in ibuprofen. So as long as you communicate, the side effects that you get from cannabis are less than almost anything else that you can put in your body. So you have to kind of make a personal decision. Am I willing to feel maybe a little uncomfortable to get the benefits versus getting adverse effects from an opiate or something like that? So it depends on the individual, but our technology definitely helps.
All right, so I have one more question before we get to our wrap up. This has already been fascinating. There is a company we were doing a project with. They're based here in Texas, actually, and they have a Delta 9 product. And I find this fascinating. They say that their Delta 9 product is legal, and I think that just means the THC is low. They say it will get you high, and I can confirm I've tested it. It will get you high. And they say you won't pass a drug test, right? But it's legal. Like if you say it gets you high and you won't pass a drug test, I feel like, how is that possibly legal? Do you know, or is this?
I have an idea. I don't know for a fact. I don't know the company, but I have an idea. So when we passed the Hemp Act, you're allowed to sell 0.3% THC products across the country. So dosing has been interesting from state to state. So is it 0.3 per bottle or is it 0.3 per dose? So if you have enough 0.3s in one dose, now you're above that threshold that now it becomes Delta 9 THC, and now you can have that euphoric experience. So I see a lot of people, selling that across the country. Is it legal?
So you would put it in a smaller bottle, make sure you have about 0.3 or below, and then each serving is enough that you're getting more. So they're playing some interesting games there.
Yeah, it's a math game. It's 0.3 per dose. So if you have I was in Portland and I got a gummy and I was like, all right, I'm not a big fan of gummies, but I wanted to see what it was, and it was like it's 10 milligrams. I'm like, oh, okay, 10 milligrams is fine. But it was 10 milligrams per dose, but the gummy was 1. So you're supposed to cut it in 10 doses. And I ended up taking half. So it was 50 milligrams. It was an interesting experience.
and having the experience. All right. This has absolutely been fascinating. I have some questions, kind of rapid fire, related to kind of longevity and health. Do you have a target age that you want to live to?
I'd like to live as long as I can be healthy. So the target age, I always had 120 in my mind, but it has to be a healthy 120. I don't want to be, just existing.
No, that's a great answer. A lot of people just say, I just want to be healthy and not give an answer. I like, there's a target, but there is a caveat. How long do you think humans can live?
I think that we can live at least as long as other mammals have on Earth. So, there's whales who lived over 300 years. We have the capability. Aging is a disease. It can be reversed. I saw David Sinclair speak at A4M. There's so many different things that they're doing right now with technology that we can reverse aging. It's going to be up to science and up to us. Humans don't have a really good discipline on sticking to things. So if we actually are able to modify our lifestyles, I think we can live as long as the oldest mammals on Earth.
I love that. Were you at the recent A4M in Vegas?
Yes.
Okay, we had a booth there, so I was there too. I saw that same talk, and yeah, I'm a big fan of him lobbying for changing the medical community's view about aging. I think that's instrumental in actually solving all the diseases that we're spending.
Reversing blindness. They're reversing blindness now in mice and monkeys. That's the next, and then it's going to be hearing and all that stuff. It's amazing.
Yeah, absolutely amazing. What are 2 to 3 protocols, habits, mindsets, let's call them shortcuts, because everybody likes shortcuts, to longevity and a long health span that you would share?
I'm a very disciplined person. I haven't eaten meat in 16 years. I eat fish. So putting the right things in your body, I think, is extremely important. And it's not for everyone. You should find out what works for you. Do every single test that you can on yourself. Look at your microbiome. When I did my microbiome, it showed me that bell peppers are inflammatory to me. If I didn't know this, it would be like, bell peppers are super healthy, but you have to know yourself. So everything is personal in that way. Sugar. I cut out sugar, one of the worst things that you can put in your body, unless you're getting it from fruit, etc. So understanding those things, and then having a collaborative experience with your healthcare professional. One quick story. I'm very, very stressed when I have to give blood, even though I'm all tattooed. If you can't see me, I have tattoos everywhere, so I'm not afraid of needles. So last time I was giving blood, I almost passed out. I told them that as well. And so when I got my results back, my doctor says, "Oh, your blood sugar, blood glucose level is high." And I was like, "I don't eat sugar. That doesn't even make any sense." He goes, "You know what? It could be the cortisol level that you secreted during that stress, which elevated your blood glucose level. If you want, I'll prescribe a glucose monitor. You can see how it works for several weeks," which I did. And now we were able to see that it wasn't that. Instead of going to a doctor who says, "Oh, high blood sugar, let me give you a pill for that." So those are the things I would do.
Yeah. So have you had a glucose monitor on when you've gone to give blood and seen a glucose spike?
No,
yet?
I didn't do that. No.
Right.
That's a good idea.
Yeah, you don't want to sign up for that in general, right? But if you had one on when you went there, like that's I love it. Earlier today, I was talking with the biohacking babes, and we were talking CGMs, and it's really, really cool. What are 1 to 2 things that people get absolutely wrong about longevity and a long health span?
Well, it's longevity. It's like, okay, my mom's aunt just passed away. She was 102 years old. For the last 25 years, I mean, she always had a smile on her face, but she had to wear a diaper and all that. It's just existing. It's not living. And so I think that understanding your own genetics, understanding what can I do to maximize the things that I put in my body. And if you're putting good things in your body, exercising, it's really important. What type of exercise works best for you? I think those things are truly, truly key in longevity and health span. If you have good genetics and you're going to live to 102, like, my mom's aunt, but the last 20 years, you're sitting in your house, you can't really walk. I don't think that's a lot of fun. So just understanding that you can maximize your own potential, but you can only take it so far for now.
Yeah. So the thing that they get wrong, if I were to summarize correct, is like focusing on longevity, but not a health span.
Exactly. Yeah, that's a good way to summarize.
And Len, how can people contact you?
EndoDNA is our website, endodna.com. I'm on all social, Len May, Lenmay. I think on Instagram, I'm Len May DNA. I have a podcast called Everything is Personal, and I have a book, as you said, Making Cannabis Personal, which you can get on Amazon or wherever you get books.
Awesome. And what in the near future are you excited about?
I'm excited about the research on health span, like that David Sinclair is doing. I'm excited about all the cancer research about, cryo-freezing a cell, delivering specific information to that cell, breaking it apart, and, creating stem cell and NK cell therapy to be able to extinguish it. I think we can cure all kinds of diseases nowadays, and we just have to have, the whole community come together to do that.
A little more work. I'm excited about those same things. So you can find Len at EndoDNA, ENDODNA.com, on IG, on some social media, it's Len May, LENMAY. And I think on IG, it's Len May DNA. And then the podcast is Everything is Personal. Len, thank you so much for joining us today.
I appreciate it, man. Thank you.
I hope you enjoyed this episode of the Live Beyond the Norms podcast. Make sure to subscribe and follow. Also, make sure not to be that guy, the guy sharing this podcast with people who are not interested in living beyond the norms. If you would like to learn more about the ESS60 molecule, the molecule responsible for the single longest longevity experimental result on mammals in history, a full 90% extension of life, visit myvitalc.com. That's myvitalc as in carbon.com.